So today's session is going over the basics of Midnight reports editing. I'll be jumping into the admin menu for the majority of the session to cover the core areas of where we make the simple modifications and controls as to what our reports are titled, where they're located, how they're able to be printed, and some of the areas outside of their simple modules where they can actually be found. To start things off, I'll be looking at the global settings, though, where we have the ability to define how reports can actually be distributed and tracked through Midnight. Under the global settings in the Reports tab, you have the ability to assign a default BCC address. Because Midnight doesn't track outgoing messages much like your Outlook email service would, you can utilize the default BCC here to have emails going from Midnight to a dedicated email recipient on your server. So that way you can track what's actually going out of Midnight by having a secondary respondent. The default email signature is a field where you can populate, well, the signature for any outgoing emails. And any reports that are attached to your outgoing emails will, of course, reference this specific signature. This is a global signature. This is not a user-based signature. So if you fill out your company's logo and contact information, be aware that this will not allow you to have a user-based contact number or return email method. A new function that we've built in with our recent 6.1 update is the ability to have your security privileges on your security accounts given rights to be able to have users access specific reports. By checking this field, you enable the ability to have those security rights enabled, and I'll go through those shortly. The next stage I'll check out is our report type objects in our admin menu. In here is your categorization of the different reports that you have. You'll see accounting reports, customer reports, order reports. If the name of a report type seems to make sense with the name synonymous with a specific module, such as the estimates, orders, warehouse could relate to inventory, tools for proofing, or any of the other core modules, these reports within this particular report type will correspond to that particular module. For other report types, such as accounting, in this case, my custom reports, sales reports, and production reports, if they do not have a similarly named module to associate themselves with, then they'll be available within the reports module, accessible by clicking the reports view button here next to the admin menu. By default, you won't see estimates and orders among other reports within your Midnight Reports menu. That is because the Show in Reports menu for these objects is set to No. You can enable these to make them visible in the Reports menu. However, the logic behind how they behave is quite different compared to how they behave in their respective modules. For instance, loading an invoice report within the Reports menu, if you enable the order reports, will instead of asking you to reference an order number, reference an order ID, which is different from the order number, and may not return data if you punch in the number that you're expecting to see data for. We'd suggest opening these up if you have plans to make heavy modifications to the reports, and then promptly closing them when complete. Otherwise, you run the risk of loading reports that simply don't give you any useful data to work with. Next up is the report objects list. These are the actual reports in Midnight. You'll see they have a categorization of report name, display name, and report type. The report type refers to where the report will appear. The report name is what we refer to as the unique name on the back end in case we're to make any modifications to the reports for you. And the display name is what you actually see the report named as. For instance, this active job detail report has no spaces between the words. But if we look in our job costing reports, we can see that there are spaces between the words. The clone from column allows you to determine whether or not your custom reports were built based on the design of an original source report. If you look at some of my custom estimate reports, for instance, you can see that they are cloned from, in this case, my estimate detail or estimate detail price report. And I can also see the last time that they were modified and who it was that made the modifications. In this case, it was me making modifications to these reports in April and May at these particular times, which are current with my PC's time zone. The active obviously refers to whether or not the report is visible or not and can be adjusted to make a report effectively deleted from your system. Any report that has the active status of no is not visible in any menu or submenu within the reports module or their respective reports type. The Show on DJB option allows reports to be loaded from within the dynamic job board when polling in reference to a specific job. This is most commonly used for work orders, packing slips, or inventory-related reports that are tied to a specific job in which your production team would need direct access to without giving them the permissions they would need to actually access the order and view pricing information. The Show All Pages option allows you to have a report open and view all pages for that report immediately. By default, when you open a report, you'll be able to view simply one page of that report, and if you want to progress, you would have to click the next button to proceed through the list on a multi-page report. A sales report or a customer list on a fairly populated website would be a good way to view this information. If your report is only one page, obviously this won't make a difference. But for any report that requires more than one page, the view will go to whole report, in which you can scroll down and view all pages rather than having to click forward or backwards or manually typing in the page number to see. The filter by user allows a report to be given security permissions. In our security section, I'll go over how to identify this. And the attached file as column allows you to determine the name of one of your reports. That would be the file name for the PDF that gets attached to the file as it's sent. For instance, if I look in my order reports under invoices, I can see that I have my invoice, invoice price, invoice print, invoice version summary. There's quite a few different invoices I have here. My customer doesn't need to see the name of the report as it would be defined for the report name, which is carried over into the attachment file name. In this case, I could simply make an adjustment to my report's attached file name by clicking the edit button among any other file name for any other report or other adjustable field by changing the value or checking the checkbox in the according field. In the case here for my invoice weekly report, for instance, I would just name this invoice. Then when sending this to my customer, it will be titled invoice.pdf. So again, to deactivate or hide reports by clicking the edit button and unchecking the active checkbox, you hide it. To enable this to be visible on the dynamic job board, you either check or uncheck this. To have the report load by default to show all pages, you can either check or uncheck this. Being aware that the larger the report, the longer it will take to load if you have the all pages selection chosen. And the filter by user function as well. To enable that feature, you can check or uncheck. Next, I'll dive into the security for create role write. In here, you can select a specific user role. I'll go with customer service for this chance. And within the reports module, you can grant either no access, visual access only, or read-write access to the reports. And you can go one step beyond by clicking the word reports, and actually picking and choosing what reports are available for this particular security role. By default, all reports are available, and any you wish to hide from this particular security role can be hidden by simply checking the report name and clicking Add to add to the locked out reports. If you wish to reset this and make everything available again, you can either check and hit Remove to bring them back into their available listing, or click the Remove All to place everything back into the available list, regardless of whether the box is checked. Now, to actually create your report, you'll have to enter one of your reports. This can be done either by going in through the reports module or through a core module and accessing a report within it. In this case, I'll jump in and create a new invoice that would look slightly different from the one that I've got by standard. To look at my standard invoice, if I'm not happy with how it looks or if I want to change some elements of it, I can simply click the Create Report button. At this point, I can clone from the original by selecting in the Clone From option my invoice price report. If you're unsure of the name of your report and cannot quite tell by the report display name, you can always look at the URL. In the report name, you'll see report name equals, and then the actual report name, which is a required unique value for every report in the system. I'll give my report a new name to indicate that I've just recently created it. And my display name, I'll make the same as well. When I hit submit, I've officially got a new report in the system. Now, I won't see the report available here in the reports drop-down menu just yet. I'll need to refresh this page. So if I save and close out and then re-enter, I'll then see my invoice VS that I just created. So at this point, I've got a report created. If I were to wish to get back into it and make modifications, rather than having the creator bring you straight into the editor, you can simply click the Edit Report button, and this will bring you straight into the designer for this report. And from here, if you're familiar with other programs like Microsoft Access, Excel, or Word, you can use the familiar ribbon up at the top to select your cells and make simple modifications like color, file size adjustments, borders surrounding your text containers, alignment, and other key adjustments that tend to be the more commonly used factors for these types of modifiers. You'll notice that the text boxes in this report, some have just simple text and others have brackets surrounding them. The brackets in this case refer to data calls, and they're very specifically named. If you do wish to make any adjustments to any of the text boxes, be aware that brackets are a reserved instance, and as far as the value goes, utilizing them for general naming purposes, for instance, adding a new disclaimer to your report or a thank you message, need to be carefully ignored so that way you don't cause any issues. You'll see my text is gray here to indicate that it's just general text. Black text, or text within the brackets, will always appear black and refer to data. If you were to do something like this, you would be telling the system to look for data that doesn't necessarily exist at this location, because the order comment thank you doesn't actually exist on the back end as a data call. And this would cause a strange error, probably crashing the report. To adjust the text in a cell, you can either select it and modify the text over in the upper right column on the properties list for text, or you can double click to enter that particular text container. To delete a container, it's as simple as clicking the delete button. And to add a new one, you can click the text container button and simply click to draw one out. You're brought into the expression editor as soon as you let go of the click button after creating or double clicking any text cell. And in here, you can modify the text. And if you want to add new data, you can click to expand the data dictionary from the data sources list and look for the respective element of data that you'd like to add. To add it, you can either click to drag, or you can double click to add wherever your cursor is left off at. And you can have text on the same line, but if you notice that it doesn't quite appear as such, you can adjust the dimensions of the editor to make sure that you're seeing what you're expecting to see. After you've made any of your adjustments and you wish to save your report, the Save Disk button in the upper left achieves just that. Or in the file, the Save Report option does the same. And the Save As function allows you to back up your report on the off chance that while modifying it, something goes wrong and you're unable to edit the report. Or when making modifications, you delete something and you're unsure of how to get it back. The backup will have it stored. It will save as a report file or a .mrt, and this is the default backup file type name. From here, click Save. Give your report a name and save it. And at this point, I officially have a backup of my report. If you're ever modifying one of your own reports and you get to a point where you cannot operate within it anymore, make any adjustments, or reset it to the status that it was in the previously working state, you can create a new report and open to load your backup. And this will place everything right back in. I'll recreate this scenario here by just deleting some key elements, exiting the designer and jumping back into show. So now you can see I've deleted my header. If I jump into the editor, hit File, Open, and select my Invoice VS report, you'll see everything goes right back to the way it was, and clicking Save commits that change. So my report's back to working order. I strongly suggest backing up a report before you do any work to it, so that way you always have a fallback on. For us here at Virtual Systems, to reset a report to a prior working state or to undo an issue created within the designer can be a little tricky, because we may not be able to reset the report or necessarily fix the problem without removing key elements of what it is that you find important. But by having a backup, you can load it in before your request for assistance even passes through our support security to let us know that you have the problem. Now be aware that you can open multiple instances of a report or multiple reports, period. In this case, I have a report and the designer open. Doing this is known to cause problems with cross-saving, especially when opening two different reports in the designer simultaneously. I will always suggest that you do not open two reports that are different, or if you can help it, do not open two reports ever. Only ever keep one designer open, or at the very least, any reports that you feel as though keeping open can be opened, as long as no designers are open. This will prevent cross-saving, unintentionally turning one of your invoices into, say, another invoice, or in a significantly worse case, turning your invoice into, say, a production report and then losing the invoice itself. Last thing to go over is just a couple of last-minute adjustments to the designer screen. If you wish to change your general print data layout, for instance, the size of the sheet, you can adjust either by going to the page option and selecting your size, orientation, or margins. You can also manually adjust every element of the report, either the page itself by having nothing clicked, or individual text containers or box, or panels, which are grouping fields, by clicking them and adjusting the properties on the properties panel on the right. In the case of this report, it is meant to be an 8.5 by 11. But our designer has placed this at 8.5 by 12.5 to fit everything onto the designer's page. If I were to shrink this, I would see some overlap with the bottom of the page on top of the footer. In this case, I'll click onto a blank area of the report to bring myself to the page handler. I'll turn on my large height factor for design. And now I can freely adjust the size of the page without concern of overlapping any text pieces with each other. You'll see if I scroll way down, my footer is still here, but the blue line indicates the bottom of the actual page. Be aware that the page is not necessarily filled up by what you see here on the screen. Many containers are designed to shrink based on what's in them or what is not in them. And the gaps between the text containers, like the header band, data band here, cannot be shrunk. They're there to just make things easier for you as the user. If necessary, you can disable them by clicking the Show Headers Bands to uncheck it. But this makes it a little difficult to move containers where exactly you need them to be. This is a much more accurate representation of what you will see, but do be aware in the case of any report that has lines and lines of data that can dynamically be created, such as an order with an undisclosed or undefined amount of items, or a sales report with an undefined amount of items, for instance. This will not be an accurate representation of the page consumed on regards to the blue line that we see here to indicate a cross break into the next page. That's pretty much everything there is to reports as far as the core creation process, backup method, general editing methods, and naming conventions associated with the reports. The final step I'll touch on is our emailing process. In opening up a report, you can email it by clicking the email button within the report. And then within your pop-out, give yourself a to address to determine who you'd like to send it to. The default BCC here is what's loaded in the global settings. And the file name is the report name, in this case, which is unadjusted from the invoice VS that I gave my report. Once I click submit, the report is sent. And the same goes for any other core element or report sent from any other module of the system. So that wraps up today's training on reports. I'll open up everyone for discussion and questions.